Pulsars are the remains of the evolution of massive stars. They are neutron stars characterized by pulsed emission, channeled along their magnetic axis and detected from the Earth like a lighthouse. Discovered in the radio band, they emit across several energy bands due to energetic processes in their neighborhood, powered by the strong magnetic fields. So, how do you define the magnetosphere of a pulsar?
A pulsar magnetosphere is the region surrounding the neutron star, which is filled with charged particles, so with electrons and positrons. These electrons and positrons form a magnetized plasma that co-rotates with the neutron star. That is, that it rotates together with the neutron star. This co-rotation goes up to a point which is called light cylinder, at which the co-rotation velocity would be larger than the speed of light, which is something that cannot be. Then beyond this light cylinder, the charged particles no longer co-rotate with the neutron star. Inside the light cylinder, particles are not accelerated, they simply slide along the magnetic field lines and co-rotate around the neutron star. Outside the light cylinder, the particles can be accelerated and are accelerated, and the acceleration of these particles is that produce the high energy emission of pulsars.
So you work mostly on the gamma ray emission of pulsars, but we know that pulsars emit across several energy bands. So what do we see in their emission, and how does this gamma ray emission relate to other types of emission, like, for example, the radio emission of pulsars?
Well, actually, there are now around 300 pulsars that we detect in the gamma ray band, out of the more than 1,000 pulsars that we know in the radio band. And also there are like around 40-50 that also emit the X-ray band. The emission in all these energy bands is related in the sense that they all come from the magnetosphere, but they come from different places on the magnetosphere.
Do we know where are these different types of emission coming from in the magnetosphere?
Well, in the radio band, it is more constrained. This radiation comes from the polar caps, which are the regions above the magnetic poles. In the case of the gamma rays, it is not as clear, but is quite agreed that it comes from outside the light cylinder. Because the theoretical models point to it, and the comparison of these models with observational data favors that this is the place of gamma ray emission. So outside the light cylinder. In the X-ray band, it is less clear because we have less data, and it can be outside the light cylinder or inside the light cylinder, but far from the neutron star.
And this emission is caused by what types of processes?
Well, the radio emission is considered to be coherent emission by electrons and positrons on top of the magnetic poles. And the high energy emission, gamma and X-ray, is non-thermal. It means that it comes from the acceleration of charged particles. When you have a magnetosphere that is rotating very fast and has a very high magnetic field, this magnetic field rotating at a very high speed creates an electric field very strong, very powerful, and this magnetic field rips particles from the surface of the neutron star. It takes these particles, then these particles that are accelerated with such a big electric field, they emit photons by curvature radiation. Then these particles undergo pair production. Pair production is the production of an electron-positron pair from two possible ways. One is magnetic field photon interaction. So this big magnetic field, when there is a photon crossing it, it can pair produce. It can produce an electron-positron pair, or these pairs can be produced by photon-photon interaction, so that two photons collide and an electron and a positron are created. This pair production, that is something sometimes called pair cascades, fill this magnetosphere, screen this electric field, And they just, as I mentioned, simply slide inside the light cylinder, simply slide along the magnetic field lines and co-rotate with the neutrons are not accelerated. And then in the outer magnetosphere, as I said, outside the light cylinder, this force-free condition breaks, then the electric field can develop and the charged particles can be accelerated. If you have a charged particle accelerated, you have emission, you produce radiation. By which processes? Which processes are producing this high energy emission? There are mainly two. One is curvature radiation, that is the emission produced by a charged particle moving in a curve trajectory. That is a situation that you have in the magnetosphere because these magnetic field lines are curved. Then the other one is synchrotron radiation. That is the radiation produced by a charged particle moving in a magnetic field. When you have a charged particle in a magnetic field, you have this charged particle having an helicoidal motion and then emitting this synchrotron radiation. These are the two canonical ones, the two that are considered in most of the models. But there is like a third one that actually is a mix of these two, that is called synchrocurvature radiation. It's a mixture of curvature and synchrotron radiation, and it's the emission produced by a charged particle that moves in an helicoidal motion in a magnetic field and a curved trajectory, which is a situation that you have in the magnetosphere of the pulsar. Outside the light cylinder, you have a strong magnetic field and a curved trajectory. So this synchrocurvature is acting there. Actually, curvature radiation is a limit of synchrocurvature radiation in which this helicoidal movement is very small. If you have a charged particle that doesn't have any helicoidal movement, you have curvature and a curved trajectory, you have curvature radiation. And synchrotron radiation is another limit of synchrocurvature radiation in which the curvature is very small. You have all these situations in the outer magnetosphere, so synchrocurvature radiation is very likely playing a role in the emission of high energy emission. There is also probably inverse Compton scattering, which is the scattering of a photon by an electron or a positron. So a charged particle collides with a photon and gives energy to this photon. So the energy of the photon is boosted, is increased, and you have a photon that can have an energy in the optical, for example, collided, scattered by an electron and boosted up to 10 electron volt energy. So this inverse Compton scattering is also very likely happening in the outer magnetosphere. Yeah. Well, it is in the magnetosphere in general.
So the inverse Compton is very important for very high energy emission also.
Yeah, exactly. Synchrocurvature or curvature or synchrotron can explain very well the gamma ray emission in the gigaelectron volt regime. So from 100 megaelectron volts to a few gigaelectron volts, but it cannot explain the emission at high energies because the spectra that these radiation processes generate has a very steep fall that does not agree with the data that we are having right now. We have data in the gigaelectron volts for some pulsars, for many pulsars, and for some of them, as I mentioned, Bella, Crab, Geminga also. And we have data in high energies, hundreds of gigaelectron volts, even 10 electron volts. To explain this radiation, you need inverse Compton together with the synchrocurvature, synchrotron. Yeah.
Okay, so many different groups have formulated various models to explain the gamma ray emission of pulsars. So what are the currently more favored models for this emission?
Well, there are two types of approaches in this gamma ray emission study. The first one are radiative models, which use phenomenological expressions, so simple functions such as power laws, for example, and some physical ingredients. These ones were more used decades ago. They are not much used now. The other type are complex magnetospheric simulations, so numerical simulations that try to find a structure of the magnetosphere, because to understand the gamma ray emission, the high energy emission, it's very important to understand the structure of the magnetosphere. So this simulation try to study the structure of the magnetosphere as a whole. And there are, inside these simulations, there are two types of simulations. The first ones are force-free simulations that are what is called magnetohydrodynamic simulations that consider the magnetosphere as a fluid. And the other type are particle in cell simulations that are simulations that treat with particles and fields and their interaction. And then there is a third one that is the models with which I work, are the models that I use in my work, that lies in between these two approaches. They have some physical ingredients. We solve the movement of the particles in the magnetosphere, but we do not solve the structure of the magnetosphere, because these simulations, the simulations that solve this structure, are very costly, are very computationally, are not very affordable. They need many resources. So with our models, we parameterize some quantities, such as the magnetic field, for example, and we have some realistic parameters, and this allows us to have a physical model, but that is very easy to use. It's very affordable computationally. So we have the benefits of the two models, of the two ways to study high energy emission, of the radiative models, because our models are very easy to use, and of the magnetospheric simulations, because we have some physical ingredients.
And how do these models fit with the data that we have from pulsars?
Well, they do it. They depend on the approach. The first one, the radiative models, they are able to fit most of the data, because they are very simple in their construction, so they can easily fit most of the pulsars. But then it's not trivial to extract physical knowledge from these fits. On the other side, these complex magnetospheric simulations, they struggle a little bit more in the fitting, because since they are so costly, they cannot be applied to the whole population of pulsars. They can only be generalized, so they cannot explain all the variety of spectra and of energy spectra and light curves that we see of pulsars. They cannot explain all the diversity in the observational data of gamma ray pulsars. Our models, since have the benefit of two, they are able to fit them most of the data of gamma ray pulsars. Thank you very much for having me here.